Hey everybody, you're going to want to watch this one. How do we know that our Bible is authentic? We're going to find out. A lot of claims against it, so as far as plagiarism goes, so sit tight, we'll be right back. Welcome to Tanakh Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live out of Kingsland, Texas, USA, with episode number 121 with Rabbi Tovia Singers. Let's get Biblical Q&A. Welcome to the show, once again, our beloved Rabbi Tovia, the man singer. Welcome back, Rabbi.
Great to be here.
Good to see you here. Good to see you here for sure. Awesome. It's going to be a great show today. Always is. Always is. It's going to be better.
Thank God for me.
Yes, thank God for you and your amazing hair that you never comb, and it still just looks like a wig. It's like perfect.
Crazy.
That's a compliment, by the way, right? Because wigs are always like perfectly fit everywhere. Yeah, it's really cool. I used to want to.
You know that I apologize, but I need to step in here because I'm a priest and you're not. There's a guy who sent me an email accusing me of spray painting my head gray in the middle just for effect.
Oh, that's awesome. What a compliment. Just to make it look good, and it's naturally that way. How funny. Oh, I gotta tell you this one thing. When I was a kid, I was really big into like Grease, the whole John Travolta thing and the Elvis Presley slicked hair and everything. And so my stepdad thought it'd be a good idea to send me to school with the high water pants rolled up and the white t-shirt rolled up, and he decided we didn't have any Brill cream or nothing like that. So he thought it'd be a good idea to put lard, grease in my hair. And it was like one of those days that the summer playground was like 112 degrees. Man, I was outside and I could just smell myself cooking. It was horrible. Stuff was dripping down my face. It was a pretty cool looking costume though. Never again, never again. So now it's like I have these childhood like fears now. I can't even like go down the aisle where Brill cream would be found in the store. That is actually untrue, but I thought that would be kind of cute. Super.
I'll tell you something.
Okay.
I've never told anyone. I don't know what year it was, but it must have been the early 70s when bell-bottom pants came in vogue. The point is, I wore pants that had yeshiva. I went to a very strict Jewish school, and we weren't a lot of long hair, nothing. It was very, very, very strict. And bell-bottoms at the time was kind of associated with, the Beatles, the hippie movement. It was considered quite radical at the time. And I had pants that had like a flare. They weren't big, but they just were flared out a little bit. And I was sent home. I was told to go to the principal's office. Oh, yeah. I was told to go to the principal's office, and I was sent home to change my pants, that I couldn't wear that to yeshiva because that was considered at the time to be a counterculture expression. And so I've been rebelling against this. I'm wearing bell-bottoms right now, but you can't have.
That's funny. Interestingly enough, and bell-bottoms are coming back into play. Isn't that weird how things go? I mean, back in the day, you had these cell phones that were like these big bricks, and then they start getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and now they're getting bigger and bigger and bigger again. It's insane. Okay, well, let's kick this baby off, and our first topic, our hot topic today, is going to be one that I find very, very interesting. And I can't wait to hear your answer. I actually have not heard in detail before the specifics on this. So I tried to discuss it with people from time to time, just on my basic, really just small elementary knowledge about the topic. And oftentimes that's sufficient, but there's greater details, and that's why we have Rabbi here. He's going to give us some great details to go with this. So the topic being of the Bible's authenticity. Was it plagiarizing other people's work? So let me just read the question out to you as soon as I get it back up on my screen again. Okay, so here we go. This comes from a gentleman by the name of Alex. Okay. Hello, Rabbi. I have a question about biblical criticism. It seems that there are many authorities in a variety of fields, ranging from history to biblical archaeology, that question the authorship of the Bible and the veracity of the originality of its story, of the stories in it. They appear to prove good evidence for their claims at times. So my question is, what evidence is there that their claims are actually wrong? For example, one claim I've heard is that the story of Moses, Moses' humble origins, is similar to the story of Sargon of Akkad's, A-K-K-A-D-S, or A-K-K-A-D.
Akkad.
What is it?
Akkad. Sargon of Akkad.
Oh, okay, got it. Sargon of Akkad's account of his own origins, which says, "My mother, the high priestess, conceived. In secret she bore me. She set me in a basket of rushes. With bitumen she sealed my lid shut. She cast me into the river which rose over me." This is just one example of biblical critics claiming that shared motifs of biblical stories with other Near Eastern myths. We discussed one time, Rabbi, about the flood and how that's recorded too. So the Bible being a collection of legends and not necessarily accurate historical accounts. Thank you for your time. So there you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So let's deal with that face on, because if you are heading to a university, a secular university in the West, if you are going to Harvard Divinity School, if you are going to take courses at Duke's Divinity School, which I've lectured on many times, the Methodist Divinity School, you could be sure that everything in the Torah, the authenticity of the Torah, is coming under attack. It's not just the Torah, but it's the Jewish scriptures. Isaiah, who wrote the book, how many authors are there of the book? If it's not that in a university environment that they're called into question, that's not correct. They have decided there is no way the Torah of Moses comes to us more than 3,300 years ago from Moshe Rabbeinu, from Moses, our teacher. In fact, there are some people running around who have PhDs. I've seen that. I wouldn't believe. And they go, we have evidence that Moses never existed. There's a completely mythological figure out of nowhere that just pops out. Daniel, if you go to attend the university, unless it's a Jewish school, yeshiva, unless it's a evangelical Christian university like Moody, if you say that Daniel was written 2,500 years ago, and all 12 chapters were written during the Babylonian exile, they will look at you like you landed on a spaceship, like you would say that I believe in UFOs. If you would say that Isaiah was written by one author some 2,700 years ago, not by 2-3 authors, they would throw you out on your head. Let me just say this, and then we're going to go into this in detail. If you want to anger a professor at Yale in their texts on the courses on religion, Bible, whatever, you could suggest that maybe the Bible was written by Eskimos, that maybe the Torah was written by a Puerto Rican. Maybe then they might go, oh, really? Let me hear. But if you will say that all the 5 books of Moses was given to us by Moses some 3,320 years ago, try it. Try to see what happens. They'll look at you like this. This is very, very threatening to the academic world. And the reason is that if the Torah was given to us intact by a single source, from a single source, if the book of Daniel was written 2,500 years ago, if the book of Isaiah was written some 2,800 years ago, then you immediately have to accept that there's a God. Why? Because these books are filled with prophecies that have been fulfilled. So what is done in the academic world is that there's a reverse engineering where they go, well, we all know that Daniel wasn't written by Daniel. How does everybody know? Even though the book of Daniel prophesizes the destruction of the Second Temple, we have the Dead Sea Scrolls that long predated. See the last 2 passages of Daniel 9. Isaiah, Isaiah, you can't say that Isaiah was comes from the prophet Isaiah or Hezekiah, his contemporary king in the days of Isaiah. Because if you say that, then you immediately have to accept that the book of Isaiah and all of Tanakh is the word of God. The consequences are staggering, and the universities are very anti-religious. Why? Why would simply saying that Isaiah, the book of Isaiah, all 66 chapters, was written 2,700 years ago during the Assyrian Empire? The reason is very simple, because Isaiah makes predictions, and if he made those predictions, the book of Isaiah simply came to us during the time of Hezekiah's reign. That means immediately you have to accept that all of Tanakh is the word of Hashem. Immediately. Why? Because Isaiah openly predicts the coming of Cyrus, who was the ruler of the Persian Empire, who defeated the Babylonians. Now, how would Isaiah, 2,700 years ago, know about Cyrus? How would he know what's going to happen in 200 years? That's like someone 200 years ago. That's like somebody 200 years ago predicting 9/11. It'll be inconceivable. Okay, so let's first attack this. Let's first deal with what the caller asked about, and that is the founder of the first Akkadian Empire, Sargon of Akkad, lived, it is believed, some 4,500 years ago. Okay, let's say he lived, let's say dating roughly 4,500 years ago. So we have texts that describe, that sound like what we encounter in the Torah of a leader born to a princess who was put inside a basket, who was put inside of a river, and that's what we find in the Torah. Whoa! So it must be that the Torah, God forbid, the author of the Torah plagiarized this ancient document, and therefore the whole reliability of the Torah collapses completely. It's very simple. Okay. Now, this is what I want you to do: is you always ask yourself, when was the document written? How old is the document? Not how old is the empire, not how old is the Akkadian Empire, not how long ago did Sargon live. The question is, how old is the document? As it turns out, the infancy narrative dates back to the time of Isaiah. The infancy narrative that we have, this Assyrian text that we have, is roughly 2,700 years old, which means that if the text is written 2,700 years ago, that was written 600 years after the Torah was given. And therefore, whoever wrote the text had full access to the Jewish holy books. Let's face it, the earth is filled with religions that are founded on Judaism. So are we going to say, I know for sure that Joseph Smith, the 19th century prophet of the Church of the Latter-day Saints, for sure had to be a prophet of God and certainly counted an angel in upstate New York. Why? Because in the book, there's all quotes from Isaiah, 20 chapters of Isaiah is all the Book of Mormon. The answer is Joseph Smith had full access to the King James Version, and so therefore nothing is proved by this. The text doesn't date back to the time of Sargon of Akkad. We don't have any text like that. The first rule of the Akkadian Empire. Moreover, the Assyrian Empire existed not like in China somewhere disconnected from the Eretz Yisrael, from the land of Israel, where Isaiah preached. The Assyrian Empire was right there. Not only that, it was the kingdom of Judah and the northern kingdom that were at war with the Assyrian Empire. In fact, the Sargon, not the same person, but that name, because it's a royal name, just like Caesar, just like Cyrus, these are royal names, is mentioned once in Tanakh that I could think of, and that's in the first passage of Isaiah chapter 20. It's not the same person, but it's the heir to the empire. It's a completely different set of circumstances, a war, Assyria, Egypt, mixing it up with Judah. The key point is that if the text was written 2,700 years ago, this Akkadian, this ancient text, and it's talking about an infancy narrative that seems to resemble what's found in the Torah, that doesn't disprove anything. The problem that the academic world has is they have already made a mess. Meaning, they are claiming in what is documentary hypothesis, higher criticism, and so on, that the Torah really, as it stands, was only produced 2,500 years ago. So what happened is you get yourself in trouble because of the cover-up. You take a text that is 3,300 years old, and you say that text is 2,500 years old. Subsequently, another document is found that's 2,700 years old. You say, well, how could a document that's 2,700 years old be speaking about something that's very strikingly similar to a text that's 2,500 years old? But I don't date it 25. I hope this is not too complicated. I hope I'm explaining this well. So therefore, Isaiah lived approximately 600 years after the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. 600 years later. Moreover, we interacted with each other, the Assyrian Empire and the kingdom of the northern kingdom. We interacted with each other constantly. We are told in Tanakh that there were leaders of the Assyrian Empire who could speak Hebrew fluently. How do they speak Hebrew fluently? In fact, they begged, please talk to us in Aramaic. They refused to. They were speaking Hebrew, the Hebrew of the Jewish people. So that means that they knew Hebrew. How did they know Hebrew? From where? From Eskimos? The answer is they knew Hebrew because they were familiar with the Torah. Today, look at the world around you. What percentage of the world believes that the Torah of Moses is a holy book? More than half, more than 1 out of every 2 people on the planet believes that. So this is a nonsensical claim. I will say this, if you've attended university and taken classes like this, professors will simply make these off-the-cuff remarks, and if you're not thoroughly familiar with the text, you're going to find yourself in a lot of trouble. I know Christian scholars, I know Muslim scholars personally who've told me that when they went to universities, secular universities, their own faith was challenged. And I've known many Jewish young men and women who went to university and have all kinds of problems because it seems to contradict everything they studied in yeshiva. If you're not thoroughly familiar with these texts, you're in a lot of trouble. Now, why is the academic world this minimalist? Why does the academic world take such an approach? And the answer is it a priori rejects the divine origins of Tanakh. It a priori rejects anything divine. It approaches the Jewish scriptures and other texts of faith using the scientific methods that are used in hard sciences. And with Tanakh, it's much more difficult. And the bias in the university campus is one that utterly rejects the divine origins of Scripture. Why? Because I'm going to oversimplify this. There are many reasons for this, but one of the reasons is very simple. Very simply, the Enlightenment of the 18th century, where essentially was a movement that rejected claims to anything divine, and only things that can be explained rationally could be embraced. There was a tremendous bias during this period against Scripture, and it hasn't tailed off. Why would such a bias emerge at this time? There are many reasons for it. The most important reason is the trauma of the 30 Years' War. It was I can't think of another war. There's no war, religious war in history that took the lives of more people. You're talking about a war in the first half of the 17th century that went from 1618, 1648, where Central Europe was decimated, where 8 million people were killed. It's startling. Americans may not cite it, but it's a war that's seared into the mindset of Germany. And the result was, because the war was triggered as in the Holy Roman Empire between Protestants and Catholics, it was a religious war. It eventually mapped out beyond those boundaries. But because it was a religious war, and it was so catastrophic and devastating, that the result was, following that bloodbath, was that that religious claims and dogmatic ideas have to be rejected. Another point should be made, and that is the academic world, by its structure, I never said this before, I think it ought to be said, encourages I'm not coming up with the best term, but encourages heresy, encourages attacks against the divine origins of Tanakh. The Torah purports to be a holy book. The Torah says, do not add to it, don't take away. Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 2. It's an eternal document. It's an instruction manual for life. That's what we're discussing. In an academic setting, the goal, if you're going to get a master's or get a PhD in writing a thesis, what do you have to do in writing a thesis? You're called upon to come up with a new idea, and I use the word radical idea. Well, the concept of something new does not fit well with Tanakh. Why? Because the Tanakh is saying that this is the word of Hashem. It is an eternal truth and it's unshakable. And therefore, in a sense, there can't be anything new under the sun. So therefore, there is a clash between the approach of the academic world. We have to come up with something new. If you simply restate an orthodoxy, if you restate what is traditional, you've gone nowhere. Or be laughed out of court, because that's not what they're looking for. They're looking for new discoveries. Now, while we can make new discoveries in the hard sciences, and we can make many discoveries in the humanities, we can't just go and rewrite Tanakh. Tanakh is purporting to be the word of God given to us by prophets. You can't use the same approach. So therefore, there is a clash between the academic environment and the traditional environment. And unless you're well knowledgeable of the Jewish scriptures, you're going to find yourself in an enormous amount of trouble. So taking this as an example, all you have to do is ask the question, one second. Moses lived 3,300 years ago. This document upon which this infancy narrative emerges was written about a king who lived 1,300 years before, who lived, let's say, 1,800 years before the document. So, of course, somebody in the time of Isaiah in the Assyrian Empire could have written this. He was, he, not a she, you can be sure of that, he was deeply influenced by the Torah. We know that from reading the prophets. Assyrian Empire is everywhere. We're in the middle of it. This is not the Mongols invading China in the 12th century. This is another far, far away place that has nothing to do. Genghis Khan has nothing to do with Tanakh. So the answer is that the document, that the infancy narrative that you're describing comes 600 years after Torah was given, and that's why you would expect to find plagiarism, but the plagiarism is the other way. It's they who copied us. That's all. Their document is later. So why doesn't anyone go, well, maybe the infancy narrative was plagiarized from the Torah? That means this Akkadian text was plagiarized from Jewish sources. No, they wouldn't dare. The Assyrian text is plagiarized from the Jews all around them. They would never say that. Even though it's the most logical, rational explanation, they wouldn't. They won't go with it. So that's the answer to your question. It's complete nonsense. The Torah is the word of Hashem. Its predictions are stunning. We see all of the things that the Torah has told us and the prophets told us, for the most part, have been fulfilled. Please God, we are living in an age where we will merit to see the coming Mashiach, where the final prophecies will unfold before our eyes.
Okay, hang on. All right, hang on just a second. Okay, so, Rabbi, we're going to go ahead and introduce this next caller. First, I got to make sure everybody can hear me because I'm pushing too many buttons here. I can barely hear myself. Rabbi, can you hear me okay?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and introduce in this next caller, Stephen Roftus. He actually has a couple good questions, but we try to limit it to one question if possible. So I'm gonna let him pick which one he wants. He shared two with me, and then if we have time, we'll squeeze in the second question, which I think they're both great questions. We'll fit in the second one sometime later on in the show if we have a gap in between callers. So, Stephen, why don't you go ahead and tell Rabbi your question, your primary question that you have.
Okay, first of all, happy Father's Day to all of you out there. That's A.
Thank you, brother.
B, here's the question. You have all these wonderful people, Christians, who love Jews, okay? They go to Israel, they march, yet they read a book that is full of anti-Semitism. You know, I asked a minority preacher once this question. I said, you're a minority, I'm a minority. Yet you read a book that is full of racism, synagogue of Satan, we're banal, we've got scales in our eyes. If the Bible was written today, it would be like Roseanne Barr. It would be barred. It would be like, forget it, this is racism. So how do you reconcile the two? I mean, it's really problematic. I know it's politically incorrect, but who cares? You know, we're not here to be politically correct. We're here for the truth. So it's kind of. You know,
I've said many times, and I still stand on the statement. You know, just because somebody says they're pro-Israel does not mean that they're pro-Jewish. It's Israel, the land, and I'm curious with you. I mean, how is it that a nation of people, a culture of people, if you will, a religion can say that they really love the Jewish people, but a lot of what's inside the book that they worship is actually anti-Semitic.
And also, could the Rabbi just highlight a couple of the verses
let's stick with that. Let's stick with that. Because
okay, very good. Okay, Stephen, we'll let you go, bud. Thanks for the call, man.
Thank you. I'll listen to the call. Thank you, and have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye. Okay, Rabbi, take it away.
So this is a very interesting question. Moreover, I've asked the same question to many Christian scholars, pastors, knowledgeable Christians about a movement in the Christian world that has a great deal of philo-Semitism, love for the Jewish people. And how is it that the text of the Christian Bible characterizes the Jews as those who are, you talked about scales over their eyes. That is very minor stuff. What we are told in First Corinthians 3 is minor. The Jews are blind. Go to 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, even as they have of the Jews who both killed the Lord Jesus Christ and their own prophets are contrary to all mankind, forbidding us. You have stuff in the Christian Bible that characterizes the Jews in a way that has portrayed the Jew as subhuman. You spoke about speaking to a minority pastor. For a moment, I couldn't figure out what that meant. But I now figured that out. You mean you spoke to a black pastor who you asked, well, you have endured so much, I presume he's American, racism, so how is it that you could not connect? I've sometimes wondered, I never said this on air, but I remember once driving to Newark Airport and passing by a church. I was grabbing a flight and coming on the gardens, whatever. A Southern Baptist church on a Sunday, and I saw many black parishioners going in with their Sunday best. And I was thinking to myself, if you realize that the Southern Baptist Convention began in 1843 because they wanted to ensure that slaveholders could guide and lead churches, and therefore in Augusta, Georgia, this movement, as the Southern Baptist, the largest Protestant denomination, was born out of sin, it wasn't that there was racism, and the whole purpose of this denomination, which must have, 20 million members in America, I have no idea, it's huge, was born out of racism. And that was its raison d'etre, its whole purpose. Let's get back to the question. Now, there's no question, there's no doubt that if you're viewing this show and you know my bias, I don't hold the Christian religion. I don't hold the Christian religion to be in a favorable way. And you'll say, well, that's the reason he's being so unkind to the Christian religion, because this rabbi is known for his anti-Christian teachings. You don't need me for this. All you have to do is go online, download the writings of the church fathers, look up the word Jew, and pick your church father, and just see what did the church fathers, whether they are anti-Nicaea from the 4th century, after the Council of Nicaea, what do they have to say about the Jews? And you'll find that all of them read these texts in the Christian Bible as virulently anti-Jewish, exactly the way I'm reading it. Moreover, all you have to do is to read the rantings of the reformers from Luther to Calvin, and they all understood the Christian Bible as texts that point to the venomous nature of the Jews. My reading of the Christian Bible as being one that nourishes anti-Semitism is not unique to me. It's not controversial. That's normal. It is normative to believe among scholars who are not Jewish, who are Christian, to conclude that the Holocaust couldn't even be possible without the Christian religion. It's not an accident that the Holocaust emerged in Christian Europe. There were no Buddhists involved in it. So, but as it turns out, there are around the world many, many Christians today, and especially in the United States, who have a very, very, very deep love for the Jews. This affection of the Jews is very, very striking. I used to think, when I first encountered it, that this was a tool, it was simply a device, it was insincere, and it was only the philo-Semitism that we hear that we love the Jewish people. They really don't have a love for us, but they want to convert us all. They want to get all the Jews to go to Israel, and then once the Jews are in Israel, then their final apocalypse will unfold, and the Jews will be killed, the 2/3 will be killed. How will they interpret text? And they really just want to engineer their end time, their eschatology. So they go, we love the Jews, but baloney, behind closed doors they don't. I very quickly realized this was completely not correct. It became very clear to me that this assessment, which would have been very convenient for me, was completely incorrect. And I'm the person who's willing to convert and be converted, and I made a 180-degree turn on this point. So as it turns out that the love for the Jews among evangelical Christians is generally what I found is very, very sincere. These people really do have a genuine love for the Jewish people. It's not just political, it genuinely is there. Not all of them do, but they are very, very sincere. And how did this emerge? And the answer is, it's 19th century. The 19th century, and you can trace this back to a pastor, a preacher named John Nelson Darby, who was born in the year 1800, came to the United States and preached what we would call premillennial dispensationalism. Now, what does that all mean? 10 seconds worth that there are different dispensations, different spiritual economies, different periods in history where God interacted with mankind based on a different salvation program. That is not germane to the question. What is germane is that he preached, and this spread in the United States like wildfire, that in fact that what was up until then almost universally believed among Christians, that God was done with the Jews, that it's true that the Jews once had a covenant with God. I grant you that, of course, the Jews were the chosen people, but because they killed Christ, therefore they lost the covenant. The church is the heir to all the promises and blessings that once given to the Jews. That's replacement theology, covenant theology. It's all over the place. John Nelson Darby rejects this entirely. He was quite the scholar and Hebraist. And he argued that no, that in fact the covenant made with the Jews in Tanakh, in the Jewish scriptures, is eternal, and he was right. It's permanent, he was right. It's unbreakable, absolutely. And in fact, God has two covenants. One with the Jewish people, which cannot be undone, cannot be broken. It doesn't mean that Jews are saved. Jews have to become Christians in order to be saved, to go to heaven. And if they don't become Christians, they're going to go to hell. Just know that. These are not. There is a small movement called dual covenant theology who believe in what's called dual covenant theology. Don't confuse the two. Those who hold that actually believe that Jews don't need Jesus. Jesus is only for non-Jews. I'm sorry to digress. I just don't want my listeners to misunderstand this. So this idea that, in fact, the covenant that God made with the Jews throughout the Jewish scriptures can never be undone, can never be broken. It says so openly in Tanakh. The Torah openly says everywhere that is forever and ever. And even if the Jews behave badly, read the end of Leviticus 26, one of the harshest chapters in the Torah. I mean, the Jews get it. When I say the Jews, I mean the children of Israel. But look at verse 40 of Leviticus 26. Ultimately, it says that when they've been thrown out and so on, they'll cry out to God. They will turn back. My mercy, I will bring them back, because I would never, never break the covenant they made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Well, you can't get any worse than Leviticus 26. And you can't get any better than its ending. It is no matter what happens, Jeremiah 31, no matter what. Look up at the sky. Do you see the sun? Look up at night. Do you see the stars and the moon? So is the seed of Jacob. It can't be broken. So number one, the covenant with the Jews is forever. And the land of Israel belongs to the people of Israel, and that was permanent. It can never be undone. There is a second covenant, he insisted, that is with the church, the body of believers, the body of Christ. And that covenant is one of not an earthly covenant, but a heavenly covenant, an eternal covenant. And so there's two covenants, one with the church and one with the Jews. Now, this also would spark Christian Zionism. This would be spread by preachers like Moody. You have the author of the Scofield Bible, which emerged in the early 20th century, which sold in the millions to an early 20th century, which shaped the thinking of American Christians, and therefore it by nature had to change, to alter to the view that Christians had of the Jews. That means if God is still working through the Jewish people, you can't hold that the Jews are the people of the devil. It's not compatible. It, by necessity, nourished philo-Semitism. So what happened is that you have texts in the Christian Bible that are transparently anti-Jewish, where those who are against Jesus are the Jews, especially in John. You look at the Passion narrative, and you pick your gospel as I make. The Jews are horrible. I mean, they are the enemy. And the later the book is, the worse the portrayal is. Mark, the Jews are culpable for handing over Jesus to ultimately to be crucified. They're ultimately the ones who instigated. But once you go to Matthew, Luke, it's much, much stronger. In Matthew, already you have Pontius Pilate and his wife, two non-Jews, arguing for the innocence of Jesus. And the Jews screaming, crucify him. And Pontius Pilate washing his hands of this. He's innocent. And the Jews reply, we take it upon ourselves and our children. Well, those words and John, it's even worse. So, in short, the text in the Christian Bible, so many texts portray the Jews as the villains. But what those who hold to premillennial dispensationalism appear to not read the text that way, because it just doesn't work. So what they'll do is they'll say it's not all the Jews, it's just the leader of the Jews. They'll read it in a way that essentially no one has ever read the New Testament in the past. And there are texts in the Christian Bible that can portray the Jews positively. So what happens is the texts that appear, John 8:44, the whole John 8 is a screaming, once you get past the adulterous woman fantasy, I say it's a fantasy because it was a much later developed text that is inserted later. Once you enter into a screed against the Jews, that's shocking. Christians were not crazy. So those texts are remapped and are subordinate to those texts that could portray the Jews positively. Salvation is of the Jews, and certainly texts in the Jewish scriptures. There is a tendency among premillennial dispensationalists to emphasize the Jewish Bible more than their co-religionists, other Protestants like the Presbyterians, who don't hold to this at all and could be quite hostile to the Jewish people. So now, simultaneously, it's important to note that those who hold to this belief also believe that Jews must be converted. And in fact, as it turns out, virtually all the missionary organizations in America that are specifically targeting Jews for conversion. Doesn't mean they don't want to convert anyone else, but it's the Jews, okay? You go from Jews for Jesus, a Baptist mission to the Jews. Chosen People Ministries, another Baptist mission to the Jews. The Assemblies of God, those are charismatics, but they all hold to this premillennial dispensational views. All of them, all the missionary groups are huge Zionists. All of them are. None of them hold that the Jews have been replaced. So at the very same time they hold that the covenant God made with the Jews is permanent. They also believe that the Jewish people have to be converted to Christianity, but they're not interlocked. Now, what happens is they benefit from, but they're not connected, because they are so pro-Jewish and pro-Israel. There's no doubt that their ability to evangelize Jews has become much more effective, because they can distance themselves from Christian anti-Semitism and say they weren't real Christian. The real Christian loves the Jewish people. This is complete nonsense. And I will just say this: if you go into Dallas Theological Seminary's library, if you go to Houston Baptist, if you go to any of their libraries are filled with the works of Luther. And they will say that you'll ask them, did Luther go to heaven or go to hell? Because if a real Christian loves the Jewish people, Luther, by every measurement, was a virulent psycho-anti-Semite to the day he died, and he was not insane. Did he go to heaven? This will be a really tough question. If you ask just straight up, a Christian who's knowledgeable, I once did a radio show, I'm not going to even say it, on a big Christian radio station, and the host claimed to not be aware of the fact that Luther was an anti-Semite. I'll take his word for it, but people know this. Did did Luther, he was an anti-Semite, and he was a virulent anti-Semite. If anti-Semitism is not compatible with Christianity, then was Luther a true Christian or not? If you want to see a evangelical Christian take a deep breath and think about that, just ask that question. And an honest Christian will go, this is a very interesting question. Because that means that you can be an anti-Semite and be a Christian and be saved. And it's not correct. So now one other point should be made, and that is the movement of this movement that was sparked by a British preacher and came to the United States in the 19th century was not restrained. This view of the Jews was not only restrained to those who hold this. There are many, many Christians who are not premillennial dispensationalists who view the Jews much more favorably and view Israel much more favorably because they were influenced by this. So it didn't just affect, those who belong to those denominations that embraced it, only they embrace this philo-Semitism and Christian Zionism. No, it bled out into the evangelical Christian world. There are, for example, Anglican Zionists who are very, very pro-Jewish, very pro-Israel. Now, you could be sure the Anglican Church is very divided. For those who are not familiar, the Anglican Church is divided between a liberal wing and a conservative wing of the church. And the conservative wing of the church, very frequently, is very, very, very pro-Jewish. So it bled out to them as well, and bled out to many, many other Christian denominations that embrace the general idea that God's covenant with the Jewish people is eternal. However, I want to make this note, or else I'm going to get 5,000 emails, and that is that they would say that God doesn't have two covenants. He has only one covenant, and that's with the Jews. There is no such thing as a covenant that God made with the church. There is a salvation program that God has with the church, but there's actually one covenant. So you asked an Anglican who was pro-Jewish, and do you hold to two covenants? They would say, no, we hold to one covenant, and that covenant is only with the Jews, and there is no other covenant. So the answer is that they read the texts that don't work well with this, and they have a way to explain it away. And I find this, I'll end off with this, I find this very striking, because I'll say this in my good feelings towards them. I think you have to be pretty amazing to read the Christian Bible, take it literally, and really have good feelings about the Jews. And that's why I like them. It sounds crazy. I usually am always handling the text in a way that, of course, I want to demonstrate why they're reading the Jewish scriptures is completely off. But I am also amazed by this striking thing. It's amazing to me how someone could read the Christian Bible as a Christian, a believing Christian, and just read it right down the line in the King James, and not walk away and just join the Ku Klux Klan. I have no idea. But there's no doubt these people really have a genuine love for the Jewish people, and therefore they look at these texts differently. They say, well, it's only the leaders of the Jews. It really wasn't all the Jews, or this was then, it's not now, or this is part of a plan, and the Jews have nothing to do with it. And they have to sort of work their way around these screaming screeds against the Jews. So this is where it comes from. This is where it stems from. But I want to warn you, I'm going to get a lot of messages saying, oh, that's so anti-Christian. I said something. What I've said is not unique. It's not controversial. All the church fathers, all the reformers held these very unfavorable views of the Jewish people and the culpability of the Jews for crucifying Jesus. In fact, you can go to John MacArthur's Bible. John MacArthur is no anti-Semite. If you read his commentary on, I talk about this in volume 1 of Let's Get Biblical, but in Zechariah 12:10, in his commentary, he says openly that at the end, when Jesus makes his second coming, the Jews will will take it apart, will recognize that they crucified Christ. Well, how else do you read that? How are Jews today responsible? They will look to me whom they have pierced and mourn over him as one mourns over, and they say that's the Jews. Even though John 19:37 says it's not the Jews, it's talking about Roman soldiers. It's striking. So they kind of live in that world. But I have to say, I have to nod my head to this, and that is, it really requires tremendous theological, athletic abilities to read the Christian Bible in a way that's favorable to the Jews. I nod my head. If you can do that, you're quite a person. That's why I like them. I personally admire them, because how do you get through that text and not walk around grumbling, I wish I could, I don't know, but they do. And it's fascinating. Strangely, I know I said that, as it turns out, the largest source of conversion to Judaism today is from the same evangelical group. Strikingly, here you have this premillennial dispensationalist movement that is pro-Jewish, and they also very committed to converting the Jews. This love affair they have with the Jews has drawn their followers to study Jewish texts and be more focused on the Jewish scriptures than are other Christians. Many, many Christians never even read the Jewish Bible. They just know the stories of the flood, the big stories. And you very often see Christians with just the New Testament, doesn't even have a Jewish Bible in it. This movement, strangely, sent shockwaves in the Christian world, where today many, many former evangelical Christians are now Jewish or B'nai Noach, because these people went, really, the Jews are not cursed. Let's study what the Jewish people say. Let's study the Jewish scriptures more carefully. After all, the assertion that the covenant with the Jews is forever, is foundation, is Tanakh. And what happens is that they are drawn into Tanakh. They have a heart for the Jewish people, and the result is that they, Christians, are converting to Judaism in the thousands and thousands and thousands each year to their. So it's Utsu Eitzu V'Sufa. Let them come with a plan, and it will not come to pass. Dabru Dover V'Lo Yokum. They will say a word, hatch a plan to convert the Jews. V'Lo Yokum, it will not be established. Why, Ki Manuel? Because God is with you, and God is with you. Nothing is impossible. So, please, God will see so many more of these evangelical fundamentalists studying Jewish sources, studying the Jewish text, coming back to the Jewish scriptures, coming back to the original language of the Jewish scriptures, and they will embrace one God and one God alone. Anyways, thank you for that question.
Okay, awesome. All right, we're going to move to this next question. Here, it's a message on Facebook, which I find is very intriguing. Okay, let me go back to the original question. Okay, so who decides we have all... let me reread this one. Who decided we have to have... Okay, so how... I'm going to reword it the way I kind of get it myself here. So with Judaism... let's just say that you worked for the people who do the DNA testing. How is it that you're able to track DNA back all the way to Mount Sinai? Okay, and so more importantly, if you is it possible someone like myself who has never had a DNA test could be Jewish and not have to convert, but just still keep the laws if there is no way to connect it back to Sinai anyway? Because I mean, how far does genealogies actually go, like as far as tracking goes, before you have to go on biblical history from then to back all the way to the back? So the whole concept of this being is there's a lot of people who are concerned or confused as to why they would have to get a conversion. Maybe they're Jewish, and if they're Jewish, then why do I have to go through all this? There's a lot of heartbreak, there's a lot of confusion. Some people just want to know because they're curious, which is kind of like where I'm at. But trust me, the question's out there, and a lot of people really want to know the answer to that. Just real quickly, I want to make sure I didn't leave off something important, because this was something that I probably should have read off the screen. So basically, because if you do not have that data that goes back to Mount Sinai, then who is to say who is a Gentile and who isn't a Gentile? Or would that even be debunked already until one can prove his DNA? There's a lot of stuff I just rambled on. You kind of got this?
Yes, I'm going to unpack it.
Thank you. Here we go.
All right, let's unpack this one. First of all, the word Gentile is not a Jewish word. It's a Gentile world. It has a Latin derivative. I'm not trying to be funny, but sometimes it's curious. One point that has to be explained. Unlike other world religions, you can embrace the Jewish faith in two ways: as one who is of the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, meaning of the children of Israel, Bnei Israel, or as someone who is not converted to Judaism, and that person is called the Ben Noach, they're the righteous among the nations. And of course, someone can convert, but then they're actually joining the nation. So it's a little tricky because this difference does not exist in other Abrahamic faiths. Yeah, it could be argued that there are many Muslims who believe that that Jews who are devoted to God are saved, but we'll set that aside. So let's discuss the DNA. Let's discuss this very clearly. The Jewish people, conventional, are those who are the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Many of us know precisely what families we come from. I'm one of those people, and my family can trace its genealogy right back to the tribe of Levi. And I'm a direct descendant of Aaron, the high priest. I and hundreds of thousands of other Jews are descendants of this smaller tribe. I say smaller, if you read I'm not going to go into why, but you go to the book of Numbers, and it opens with an account of the size of the tribes. The tribe of Levi is one of the smaller tribes. We could trace ourselves back. Kohanim and Leviim, there are special laws that apply to us, especially Kohanim, and therefore religious Jews who are Kohanim would very frequently know. It's very common for us to know what tribe we're from. Descendants of the house of David, descendants of the tribe of Judah. Many of them know exactly who they are, whether it's Rabbi Gamliel, Rashi, and family members of mine. So many Jews know exactly who they are, but as it turns out, there were many Jews throughout history that abandoned the faith, that walked away from a relationship with God, who converted to Christianity, who got baptized. And because they converted out, they lost the covenant, or temporarily lost the covenant, and the children completely lost their identity. And we don't have Jews who, let's say, convert to Christianity in the 13th century in Spain. Their descendants are not among us today. Doesn't mean they didn't have children. It's not like their daughters didn't have babies. They did. But those children all identified as Christian, and today they've completely lost their identity. That means there are, I don't know, probably millions of imposter Gentiles walking around who think that they're not Jewish, but in fact are. Many of these people have traced their genealogy back, just going back 4, 5, 6, that means going female. The children of Israel is conveyed only by the mother, not by the father. Why is a totally different show? But the father does convey tribe identity, but the fact that we use the word Jewish, it's a biblical term, is only identified is only conveyed through the mother. So there are many people who discover in life as an adult they were Jewish all along. Very famous people. There was a former Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, who discovered late in life, as it turns out, she happens to be Jewish. I remember there was a senator from West Virginia, an devout evangelical, discovered it turns out he's Jewish. It goes on. People just discover why, because in the 19th century, Jews came under fire like what else is new from all over. And one of the ways out, your ticket to safety was just get baptized, convert, and assimilate in the church, and then Hitler won't be able to find you if you can do it well enough. So there was a huge incentive. Not only that, if you wanted to enter a university, if you wanted to attend Oxford University, go back a century, if you wanted to attend Harvard University, they weren't taking Jews in for a very long time. If you wanted to be able to go into certain trades, you only do that as a Christian. And there were many philosophers who were completely Jewish who converted solely to Christianity, solely to gain entrance into society and to be able to go to attend universities and to enter certain trades that were off limits to Jews. So there are many people who simply do do a lot of hard work and says, okay, who's my mother, go back, ask your grandmother, who do you know if possibly your grandmother might have been Jewish? You might be shocked. Look at there are genealogists out there who specialize in this field, and people are discovering, because there's been so much conversion to Christianity in the 19th century, Jews living in the Pale Settlement. If you imagine, you have Nikolai II, a filthy anti-Semite, who got his big reward in this world and the next one. Yeah, he hated Jews. Life would have been very easy for you to do with what Tovia's daughter did in the fictional story of Fiddle on Roof. Marry, become baptized, join the Russian Orthodox Church, and you're gone. You were fine. You assimilate very quickly. So do your studying. Ask a lot of questions. Now, the questioner asked the question regarding DNA. So let's talk about that for a moment. There's no such thing as Jewish DNA or DNA from Mount Sinai. No one has DNA from Mount Sinai. Let me explain what this whole thing is about. The fingerprints that are found on DNA can be mapped to Jewish people who know that they are Jewish. Let me rephrase that. So the DNA of people who are known to be Jewish can be collected and have been collected, assembled into many thousands of people whose family origin is very well known, very well mapped out, and say, okay, here we have a fingerprint. Now, it's not one, but it's actually of different areas of the world, whether it's the areas in the East, in the West. These are known. This is our model. I mean, this is what we know. This DNA that we have assembled is known to be the DNA of people who almost certainly are Jewish. The question is, if we test your DNA, will it match what is known or not? Okay. If it is determined that your DNA closely matches the DNA of known Jews, that does not in Jewish law make you Jewish. However, it can open a lot of doors for you, because it will often tell you that, look, your DNA traces itself back to a certain area of Europe, a certain area of Russia, a certain area of wherever, Iraq, okay, Yemen, the southwestern part of the Arabian Peninsula. Very long Jewish history there, 2,500 years since the destruction of the first temple. So what they're doing is there's no such thing as a Jewish DNA, but there is DNA that's been collected, and then how well do you match? The information could be priceless, because they'll say to you, look, this is really, you come from Yemen. It seems that your DNA matches those of known Yemenite Jews. Well, then you know where to start searching. Then you know, oh, I had no idea I was even connected to that region of the world. Or it comes from another region of Western Europe, Central Europe, Eastern Europe, and so on. So then you can hire genealogists who specialize in that area of the world, and she will have access to an enormous amount of data. Genealogists have access to to burial grounds, to tombstones, to marriage certificates, baptismal certificates, and they know where to look. And they go, oh, wait, we have the tombstone of your great-great-grandmother, and it's right here in Hungary. And that's and that could be definitively established as you are Jewish. It means you literally find the tombstone of your great-grandmother, and turns out she's Jewish, then you're considered 100% Jewish. One other point I should make, which sort of comes back to where I originally began, and that is that a person can embrace the Jewish faith who is not Jewish and not convert to the nation of Israel, but embrace the faith of Israel. And they are, we use the term B'nai Noach. It's not, it's just a convenient term. It means those who embrace the Jewish faith, but for whatever reason have not converted to Judaism. One other point I should make. In traditional Jewish thought, those who actually undergo the conversion to Judaism are thought to be people who really were always Jewish all along. The idea that those, in fact, the word convert, is the translation for the word ger, okay? But the word ger doesn't really mean convert. Ger means a stranger, someone who just didn't know. What does it mean? It's a very strange term, stranger. Like, why stranger? What is that? Why not just say, why don't we have a word for it that those who are descendants of other nations convert to Judaism? Our words don't map that concept at all. Our literature, halakhic literature, speaks of ger shenis gayer, a convert who converts. I'm using the word convert. The word doesn't mean convert in any conventional sense. What is being conveyed is that these people all along were always Jewish but didn't know it. And now they're making it official by going through a conversion. These people are largely the descendants of Jews who were, for whatever reason, forced to convert. And if they were forced to convert, then God would figure out a way to bring them back to the children of Israel. Or they are from the people, descendants of those who Abraham had in Haran, the 70 souls that he had made, the descendants of these people. The point, and therefore we encounter very frequently that people who have converted to Judaism only 2 years later discover, oh, look at that. I just found out. I had my great aunt said to me, you converted to Judaism? As it turns out, we were always Jewish. Really, I didn't know it. So you have a lot of people like that. So the point of the DNA is the DNA is valuable because it can point you in a direction of where to look. If your intent is to be recognized as Jewish by the children of Israel, so you would have to map out exactly how your biological mother's mother, only the mother's line is relevant on this point. And the DNA would say this is where you're connected to the children of Israel in this region of the world, in Europe, in whatever city, and that now gives you an enormous amount of information to pursue. It may be that what you then discover is so conclusive that you recognize immediately as Jewish, as so many people are around the world, and maybe then so compelling that the rabbis overseeing this will say, it's almost certain that you are Jewish, but we can't completely establish it. So in order that no one can ever question your Jewish identity, we're going to do a conversion on the question. Okay? Just so no one will ever question your identity, so your daughters can marry someone's son. No one can ever say anything. It could be, the more compelling the information is, the easier it is to establish that you're Jewish or to sort of get the fast lane on conversion. Fast lane doesn't mean that anything will be sidestepped, but that will certainly send up huge alarm bells to rabbis saying this person is very, very likely Jewish. The rabbis, from our vantage point, I should give you a view from our vantage point, is that if there is very compelling evidence, which would be more than DNA, but if there's compelling evidence, it's very likely that this person standing before us, in fact, is Jewish, So then it becomes really important to establish that you're Jewish or help you out in a formal conversion. I'm using these words because they're just what's conventional. Because we may very likely have a Jew in front of us, and if he or she is Jewish, that means that he or she has to observe Shabbos. Shabbos is the laws of Shabbos are only incumbent upon the Jewish people. Exodus 31 is Beini ve'bnei Yisrael oisi li'am k'sheish hasa Hashem es shmayim v'zaretz v'yom hashvi shavas v'yinofash. Very clearly, it's Jews must keep Shabbos. The rest of the world is not obligated to keep Shabbos. Can't eat anything he or she wants to, and so on. So therefore, this has to be solved. So if you could get a lot of information, then the railways are going, wait, now we can't sort of leave this person alone as a ben-noach, because now there is a imperative to figure out who this person is and to make sure if this person wants to be Jewish and is most likely is Jewish, then we have to take this petition very, very seriously, because now it's trouble. Because if it turns out this person is Jewish and is not observing the Torah's commandments, now this person is not living their lives properly. So that's the larger answer to a question that I receive on a daily basis. It's a very big topic, and I'm sure you're hearing about that, William, as well. So thank you for whoever posed it.
Awesome. Okay, cool. So just want to let everybody know, if you don't have them yet, you know where you can get them. OutreachJudaism.org, 2-volume book set with Rabbi Tovia Singer, as well as some DVDs and CDs and things of that nature. Man, I had it right here. I put it back. I hate putting things back sometimes because then I forget where I put it. Anyway, so I just want to show some of you guys this. This is really cool. One of the best things that I think about this book, and I've mentioned it before, is just the way it's easy to read. As I'm getting older, don't laugh. Okay, so as I'm getting older, I find it a little bit more and more difficult to fine tune my focus on my glasses. I literally have 3 pair of glasses, so you could say I have trifocals. Okay, but make a long story short, with this book, I don't need any of them. As you can see, the writing on here, if it's going to show up, oh yeah, there you go. It's really nice and large print, right? And that's so in the front, you've got a topical index, tells you what pages to find it on. Okay, in the middle of the books, you see this laid out really nicely, large print, lots of references. In the back of the book, you're going to find the index based on the sightings in their numerical order. Right? So if you don't know the topic, but you remember a verse, look at here. If you remember if you remember the topic and don't remember the verse, then you go to the front of the book. So these are a really great resource to have, as well as these other items that we've got there at Rabbi Singer's website. Little Rabbi versus the Chaplain, kind of a nice, easy read. The Disputation, great. Been a lot of these going out lately. Chronicles, fascinating facts hidden in the Book of Chronicles. Four-part DVD. Actually, that's the wrong one. This one here. 4-part lecture DVD in Israel. It's pretty cool watching Rabbi, just kind of mixed with all the people there. It's kind of nice. And then also the Tovia Singer, Pastor Paul Humber debate is good as well. And I think that the one that he did in Houston is actually available online on YouTube. You can find it also. ToviaSinger.tv is also a great resource to have. It's a really nice, easy laid out website to find all of Rabbi Singer stuff there. So if you don't have them, you guys are wasting precious time. Got to go check it out.
I just want to add a point.
Sure.
In. I don't think I've ever said before, and I should have. It was stupid of me not to. I receive so many emails on all sorts of questions. If you have a question about a particular passage or a certain concept, if you go to YouTube and put my name in, and let's say Daniel 9, or you want to study any controversial topic, put that in your search, my name and whatever the topic is. I have there are about 600 videos out on YouTube. It's very, very likely that I've addressed the topic or the passage in question. So if you just do a search of my name with the topic, the chances are very high that you'll have a video where I cover the subject in depth.
That is a really, really good point. And I actually found that out myself even on the Tanakh Talk YouTube channel, because people send me messages all the time. Do I have topics on this and that? And at one point I found an actual magnifying glass search thing next to the Tanakh Talk thing, and so it searched within Tanakh Talk the topic. But most of the times, for some reason, for whatever reason, I can't find that button. So, like Rabbi said, just go to YouTube and in the main search window, just type in Tovia Singer virgin birth. Just like that, and it'll pull up any videos he has on the virgin birth that will associate him directly. Same with my YouTube channel with Tanakh Talk. If you want to know see the whole show, just type in Tanakh Talk, and whatever topic you think that the show could have been under. So this is how I find them, by the way. I do have a little cheat sheet that I've been working on, but it's a never-ending work. So anyway, all right, we're going to move on to this next question. All right, next question is kind of connected. You can tell me what you think about it. Was the New Testament originally only for the Jewish people, or was it literally, like right up front, was it supposed to be a global outreach program?
Oh, the New Testament is, don't send me an email, let's say the 27 books of the Christian Bible were written by many different authors who had a very different agenda. So we'll take the earliest surviving Christian writings in the New Testament, and that's the letters of Paul. There are 13 letters attributed to Paul. 7 of them are considered authentically from the hand of Paul. Of the 6 other letters, 3 of them are likely not from the hand of Paul, and 3 of what are called the pastoral epistles are, unless you're a conservative evangelical Christian, it's unlikely you will believe that those texts are authentic from the hand of Paul. But that's not germane to the question. So Paul's agenda is very easy. This is a no-brainer. Paul was writing for non-Jews. Paul, he self-proclaimed himself as an apostle to the Gentiles. Paul's letters, remember, out of 27 books, 13 are, the author claims to be Paul. Let's just set whether they're authentic or not Paul. That's huge. That's half of it. It's half the book. Paul's agenda is he's writing to non-Jews. He's writing to churches he has already established, whether it's in Corinth, whether it's churches in, like the book of Galatians. Actually, it's many churches. It's there is a disagreement about precisely where those churches are located, which would indicate what year in the 50s they were written. All the indisputed letters of Paul are written during the 50s. Maybe 49 for 1 Thessalonians. And Paul is there to address problems that emerged in the churches that he already established. He's speaking exclusively to non-Jews. There is one exception to that, and that's in Romans, you have some texts that are addressed to Jews. But Romans, which would be the last of the letters of Paul, surviving letters of Paul, is unique in that he's writing to a church that he has never been to. At the time that the book of Romans was written, he had never been to Rome. In the book of Romans, he does address Jews, as an example in Romans 7. But that's very unusual. So Paul's writings are there to address controversies in the early church. There was huge infighting in the church over fundamental Christologies. Big issue was two non-Jews, Gentiles, who want to embrace the Christian religion. Do they have to convert to Judaism first? Now, you could be sure of this, that these controversies that we're told about are authentic. These really happened. There would be no reason in the world why someone would invent something quite embarrassing, and that means why a Christian would invent controversy between Paul and fellow Christians. So by the criteria of embarrassment, that these This has to be an authentic, major problem in the early church. Paul is going to win. Paul is the most important figure in the spread of Christianity from a nominal movement of 20, 30, 40 people in the Gospels, 20 people that we know about, more for sure, to a movement that spreads all over the empire. Paul is the single most important person in that development. What Paul argues is that those who are not Jewish who become, I'm just going to use the word Christian, that's not the term he will use. Those who become followers of Jesus, whatever you want to say, those who become Christians do not have to convert to Judaism and should not submit to circumcision and should not keep the Torah. And he makes the case in a very strong way in probably his second most important letter, his letter to the Galatians, where those who are circumcised have rejected Christ, that they're not compatible with each other. He's not saying that if you are circumcised that you can't be saved. He's saying if you're looking to the Lord to save you, then you are unsaved. And Galatians begins with Paul declaring his unquestionable bona fide, that I am a rock hard Pharisee. I came from the most anti-Christian. And he makes this case a number of times in his letters that I am a Pharisee of Pharisees. I'm a super apostle, and in fact, what I have is directly from Jesus Christ. I didn't have to consult anybody else. And Paul will talk about his controversy with Peter, and Paul's saying that I shut him to his faith, exposing Peter's hypocrisy and how Peter behaved around Jews and those who had no Jewish background. Why would this be included? Because Paul is asserting that his authority and his understanding of Christianity supersedes those of the Jerusalem church, supersedes that of James, the brother of Jesus, we are told in Galatians. Paul is spending the first two chapters, I'm just saying, read it for yourself if you're not sure. I'm not in any way mischaracterizing this text. So this is uncontroversial. His letters are there to solve a crisis in the early church. For Christian scholars, that's unfortunate. For people who are trying to get a picture of the early church, they kind of wish that Paul, from their vantage point, Paul had just written letters that weren't addressing controversies, but rather what he was viewing. But we don't have those. So that's transparent. At the time of Paul, we don't have any what are now known as Gospels, although the word gospel appears in the Christian Bible, let's just say some 85 times. I'm not counting it now, but it's roughly 85, 90 times. And the vast majority of that word appears in the letters of Paul than anywhere else. Let's say, these numbers are not exact, but it's rough estimate. Let's say the word gospel appears in the Christian Bible 85 times. 70 of them are in the letters of Paul. Paul is not referring to what you think of as the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They hadn't been written yet. The question is why? It's very clear that the earliest Christians were not writing a book like a gospel, meaning a book that would to explain the history of Jesus. That means Mark would begin at the baptism, ministry, purported death, and purported resurrection and message. The earliest Christians, quite clear, believed that the world was coming to an end, and it was absolutely imminent. We see this bleeding through the earliest Christian writings, where it's going to happen, and it's going to happen at a moment. It's going to happen really quickly. And therefore, why write books? This whole thing is coming to an end. Quickly convert, because the empire is coming down, and the kingdom of God is imminent. These people who had such an apocalyptic eschatology The words, literally, those Greek words mean apocalypse means what is revelation, and eschatology comes from the Greek word eschaton, which means the end, the study of the end. That's what they were doing. That's where their head was. So if the world's coming to an end, what do you need books for? You don't need books. So the Gospels are written from, let's say, the year 70 for Mark, 15 years later Matthew and Luke, around 85, and then John, let's say, about 95. And we could see the improvements in these Gospels about Jesus and where his sonship emerges from, and so on and so forth. That's beyond the scope of the question. The purpose of the Gospels is expressed clearly by John. All this was written so that you might believe. The purpose of the Gospels is for people to convert to Christianity. Please don't send me 20 emails why people become Christians are not really Christians and we don't convert. We're using just conventional language. The reason why the Gospels are written is very clearly to convert different audiences. Now, it's possible that Matthew, the author of the book of Matthew, we don't know who these people are. It's Matthew. While Matthew is called Matthew, the manuscripts, the Greek manuscripts, don't identify the author, but the authorship of the Gospels will be established by the very end of the 2nd century by bishops around the year 180. We can firmly say that the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, will then establish. But the key is one may say that the book of Matthew, given that Matthew relies on fulfillment citations, quotes from the Jewish scriptures to shore up the Christian claim that he had Jewish people in mind. It can be said that Christians have argued that Mark was written for a Roman audience and so on. So the reason why the Gospels are written is that people would believe in Christianity. It should be said there is no doubt that there are other Christian, we'll call them Gospels, that just never survive. It's very clear that, without going into this, that there are Gospels that Matthew and Luke were relying on, which don't appear in Mark. There's no doubt that there are earlier texts that we've lost, and only we're able to weed that out by reading the Gospels that we have with us. And it's very clear that the author of the book of Mark, the earliest of the Gospels chronologically, is writing. He's a narrator on top of something that had been written earlier. It's very clear because the writer is saying this is how you'd understand it, and he's very often wrong. But Mark will take a story of disciples, Jesus picking grain on the Sabbath, and of course the Jews are very unhappy with this. And at the end of Mark 2, they're told that, look, didn't King David, when he was hungry, they get the wrong king, the wrong high priest. But what is important is, didn't David, when he was hungry, didn't he eat from bread that was normally someone who was not a priest wouldn't be permitted to eat? Meaning that to save a life, you're allowed to violate the laws, Jewish laws. That's very well known. But when you come to the last verse of Mark 2, the author of Mark, whoever that is then overlaying that this demonstrates that Jesus is the Lord over the Sabbath. This text is so widely misunderstood. I can see it easily because I see what's happened. We have tiers of scriptural archaeology where you just see that we have this early story of Jesus using Jewish law to respond to why it would be permitted to pull grain on the Sabbath. I don't necessarily believe these stories are true, authentic. It's just clear that's earlier, and it's very clear that Mark is then moving beyond that and saying, therefore, that Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath, which then conveys that, in fact, that the laws have been nullified through Jesus. That's another layer. This is very easy to weed out. So there's multiple authors that are that are moving here. We have the same type of language we have in Mark 7, for example, where we are told, Jesus said it's not what comes out of your mouth is more important than what goes into your mouth. But then the author, the narrator, is saying, therefore, you don't have to keep the commandments anymore, nullifying them. Paraphrasing here. That the narrator there, the author of Mark, is taking it a step further than an earlier text he's looking at. So the goal of the Gospels is to convert people to Christianity. But what is Christianity? Well, it depends. If you're in a very early stage, in the year 70, there is the virgin birth story had not yet been invented, or it was not widely believed. It's quite possible that when Paul states that encourages Christians not to occupy themselves with endless genealogy and so on, that he's aware that these ideas are out there, and he's saying it's only going to lead to confusion. But Paul is not aware, early text, not aware of anything unusual about Jesus' conception and birth, and Mark isn't aware of anything either. It would be very striking if Paul believed that Jesus was born of a virgin and the author of Mark believed, but they felt that event wasn't important enough to mention. It's very clear that Matthew and Luke is an improvement. Matthew and Luke has a fantastic beginning, and a fantastic ending. Mark doesn't have resurrection accounts. It ends with the women at the tomb informed by an angel that, in fact, Jesus rose, and they didn't say anything to anyone, and the book ends. And then later scribes are going to add in the 12 last verses of Mark, all the way to verse 20. So 9 through 20 is a later interpolation. But what everyone is trying to advance is what at that time was the normative, their view of Christianity. That's what the text would reflect. And therefore, we also would expect to find and do discover that we have a higher and higher Christology, which means the view of Jesus becomes more and more improved. And his divinity, not that he's God, but he is godly, or he is just on a higher caste, becomes more and more improved, as we would expect as we move from Mark and we come to John. We have our highest Christology. So what is interesting to scholars of the New Testament is that what did Christians believe in the 50s? What did Christians believe in the 60s? Are there texts in Paul that are pre-literary texts? Is the Common Christi of Philippians 2, 6 through 11, is that a text that predates Paul's own writings or not? Is a text in Romans 1, is it older than the book of Romans? This is for Christian scholars, this is a very interesting field. For Jews, this is of no interest to us at all. Why am I talking about it? I don't know. But you asked about what is interesting about it. What is interesting is to say, okay, as we unpeel the layers, we can see the growth of the movement, we can see how the Christologies are improving, how Rome really never converted to Christianity, as is conventionally understood, but rather Christianity converts to Rome, meaning that Christianity will import all the myths that were widely believed in other parts of the empire and would adopt them as well. And church fathers like Justin would express this in his defense of the Christian religion. He's a very early church father. That why, speaking to pagans, you have the same ideas in your religions. What's even the point of being so hostile? So that's the point. The purpose of the text is to advance Christianity. Paul's letters, which we really can get a wrap around it, because the 7 letters of Paul, he comes through what his purpose is. He's screaming. He's not talking. He's not whispering. There's nothing ambiguous about Paul's own letters. so we can know exactly what motivate them and why these texts are written. Anyway, thank you for that question.
Okay, very good. All right, I'm going to play a little sound clip here, just letting everybody know too, the way we're trying to handle these the future shows. Call in, and rather than keeping you guys on hold for hours or however long days, I guess some of these answers need to be elaborated upon. So leave us a detailed message, a short one. I mean, before you call in, kind of figure out what your question needs to be, keep it as short and tight a package as you can, but well explained, and then we'll go through them, and whichever ones we can put in on the show, that's what we'll do. So with that said, we'll take you on to this next sound bite here. This is a guy, Gary, had a very interesting thought on something I've never actually heard before, so we'll see. Let me get rid of this red box here real fast. All right, here we go. Oh, I gotta click the play. Oh, it's not even up. Hang on, I'm gonna start it over. My bad. Actually, he's rambling right now anyway.
Question on
Perfect.
Isaiah 11, when they talk about the wolf will live with the sheep, leopard will lie down with the kid, and the cow and the bear will graze. I was just curious what the significance of each pair of animals is, one kosher and one unkosher. Just something I've been pondering for decades. So I'd like your opinion.
Interesting. I've never even heard that before. That's kind of an interesting observation. So why is that? Why is it listed that way? To where even coincidentally, it's a strange coincidence that the three or the sets that are mentioned are like one and one, not like a pair of, kosher. You know what I mean?
Right. That's a very interesting question, and I've never heard that question asked of me. But the answer is very easy to map out. First, Isaiah 11 is a messianic chapter. It's an epic messianic chapter. It describes the final redemption. The Mashiach himself we're introduced to in Isaiah 11, his family, what Hashem will endow him with, the kind of character he'll have. He'll fear God. He'll judge people in a way that Hashem's Spirit will speak through him, not after the sight of his eyes. And the world will dramatically change. And here what comes into view in Isaiah is that, in fact, a wolf will lie down with a lamb. Now, as it turns out, a lamb is a kosher animal. A wolf is not a kosher animal. A leopard will lie down with a goat. A leopard is definitely not a kosher animal. A goat is definitely a kosher animal. Now, there are two views, just to get this out of the way. Does it literally mean, when the text talks about that a lion will eat straw like an ox, lion not kosher, an ox certainly is, does that mean that lions will become herbivorous? They'll eat straw. So there is a disagreement among our sages whether this is to be taken in a hyper-literal way, meaning it literally means that the world, that the nature of the world will change so dramatically that these animals that are carnivorous, like a lion, lions don't eat tomatoes and cucumbers, they will become, their whole digestive system will change. Or does it mean, is this a picture of enemies lying down their differences and becoming one, and former enemies will stand together, as we see in Isaiah 2? It's not relevant how you understand that. The message is clear. Isaiah is not interested in the digestive system of animals. Isaiah is interested in conveying that war will end in the world and former enemies now will be in peace. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, neither will they learn of war anymore, Isaiah 2. So therefore, what is being conveyed here is that the enemies will lie down with those that will lie down with each other, and this is quite clear. Now, the caller asked the question, is it just a coincidence that the animals, that one side of the animals are not kosher and the other side of the animals are kosher? When I say kosher, means they're clean animals as described, for example, Leviticus chapter 11. the word kosher does not appear in the text. This is a conventional term today. These are clean animals. So the answer is that all clean animals, land animals, are herbivorous. One of the two signs of a clean animal is that it has to be male gera. Male gera usually is translated as chew its cud. It really doesn't mean that. Male gera, male means to raise up and turn it over. The way that clean animals, their digestive system is, it's slow, and cows are able to eat things that if we try to, with one stomach, we wouldn't be able to digest it, but we'll take a cow, has 4 stomachs, and it digests the food, it brings it up, back again, redigests it, and finally it's broken down into its final stomach, and then the body is able to absorb, is able to extract the nutritious value of these foods that we couldn't, that the big cats and that a wolf could never digest this. These creatures, so therefore, it is very clear that it's not that the aggregation of ants cause picnics, but rather it is picnics that bring in the ants. By definition, a clean animal must be herbivorous, and therefore it would not be a predator. Now, it is quite possible, and there is some discussion of this in Jewish literature, that in fact the animals that are clean are conform well to the soul, and certainly the soul of the Bnei Israel. And the fact that the animals that are carnivorous, their meat really is mitamtem as halev. They damage the soul. But I don't want to pursue that very far. It's quite clear from the Torah's text that the chazer, the pig, is an unclean animal, and the Torah speaks of it in the context of eating it in quite a negative terms. So it's the reason why you have this distinction with a lamb will lie down. This is really a very insightful question, is because the animals that are clean must be herbivorous, and their natural enemies are the predators that are out there. This may point to the fact that the Bnei Esav, that the children of other nations who are the enemies of the Jewish people, who feed off the Jewish people, who feed off the sheep, which the Almighty refers to throughout the prophets as the children of Israel, as the prey upon which the nations feed, comes into view in Isaiah chapter 11 as well. That would certainly be a view that's expressed in rabbinic literature, that these are pictures of the children of Israel that doesn't wish to harm it. I'm talking about those who are loyal and faithful to Hashem. They don't wish to harm other nations, but rather the other nations seek to disturb and seek to harm and seek to injure and destroy the sheep. And Hashem ultimately is the true shepherd, as we see in Ezekiel and Zechariah and so on, who protects his flock. And the flock is always animals that are clean animals. Sheep don't go around chasing lions. And ultimately that these predators will change meaning. Those nations that were formerly the enemies of the Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, will become the friends of the children of Israel. And the children of Israel will then fulfill their mandate as being Brit Am, a covenant nation, Isaiah 42 verse 6, a light to the nations. Read the text for yourself. It doesn't mean 42 verse 6 is widely misunderstood. A covenant, the text doesn't say a covenant to the nation. Brit Am, it's a covenant nation. He's talking about the Bnei Israel. And a light to the nations, cross-references, maps out perfectly Isaiah 49 verse 6, The mandate of the Bnei Yisrael is to be a light to the nations, and that in fact, the children of Israel, those who are loyal to Hashem, are called to be a light to the non-Jews and to the tribes of Jacob, meaning there are many Jewish people who are lost. There are many Jewish people who have lost their identity, who are not faithful to Hashem. So those who are the servant of God, as described in Isaiah 41:8-9, 43 verse 10-11, 44 verse 1, 44:21, 45:4, v'chula, 48, 49, verse 3, they will bring back the rest of the Jewish people, the rest of Jacob, the tribes of Jacob. So that maps out quite perfectly with what comes into view. And let us hope that the study of Tanakh, the study of Jewish scriptures, will ignite the coming of the final redemption of the true Mashiach, B'mehera Yameinu, quickly in our times. Thank you for that very thoughtful question.
Awesome. Well, that is pretty much going to be a wrap. It's about 15 minutes shy of our usual target, but it is Father's Day. I hope everybody has a happy Father's Day out there who celebrate it. And Rabbi, I know that you certainly should have a great Father's Day with lots of peace and joy. And we'll look forward to seeing you again next week, same time, same place, Hashem willing. And see all you viewers out there. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you later. Take care, everybody. Rabbi, by the way, your hair looks fantastic.
Thank you.
Oh, that's funny. This is killing dead airspace. I'm trying to find my music. Hey, there we go. See you guys. Bye.
תמיד כולם ביחד, חשוב מכל חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד. איפוק זו העוצמה, ויתור זו הגדולה, השאיפה והכמיהה.